I talk with you.
When you started, you say graduated at MIT, basically presuming strictly engineering based. What turned you into venture capitalism, and what shot you in that direction, other than chasing your wife?
It wasn't just chasing my wife. So I was at MIT from 1979 to 1983, and I spent all 4 years there writing software. Even though I was a mechanical engineering major, my dad was a career Army officer. My family didn't have any real means other than just his income as an Army officer, and so I needed to get financial support to go to school, and so I did something called UROP, which stands for Undergraduate Research Opportunities Program, and I basically spent 4 years writing software in a laboratory. And at the beginning of the 4 years, we were writing software on DEC mini computers, and by the end of the 4 years, we were writing software on the IBM PC, which had just come out. And a lot of my friends were going to stay in Boston when they graduated and work for startup companies that were getting built up around Kendall Square, creating software and hardware peripherals for this new computing platform, the IBM PC, and also to a lesser extent the Macintosh computer, which was just coming out at the time. And so I had seen through them the power of startups, and startups are a fun place to work. They're chaotic and crazy, but there's not a lot of rules, and people stay up all night and sometimes come in at noon. And that seemed like a really cool job to have when I was 21 years old. When I came to New York, I didn't see anything like that. And that, I'd kind of been infected a little bit by that bug. And so I thought about, well, how could I live in New York? Because the second part of it was the part you mentioned, that my wife wanted to live here. She wasn't my wife at the time, but she wanted to live here. And so I said to myself, how could I get connected to the world of startups living here in New York? And I found out, and I kind of figured out that because of Wall Street, there must be investors here who specialize in investing in these startup companies as opposed to public stocks and such. And so I did some research and found out about the venture capital industry, and lo and behold, probably 15-20% of venture capital firms at the time, this was the early 80s, were here in New York. And so that was sort of the light bulb went off in my head, and I said, well, gee, I could do that, and I could be involved in startups, and that sounded like a good solution. And so that's how it happened. That's where the inspiration came from.
For the non-IT sectors, the bio, the urban energy, are there any startups or people that excite you here in New York or anywhere around the world?
Well, so first off, I should say that I haven't been involved in investing in anything other than software-based businesses for almost 20 years now. And so I don't track that sector, and I don't know the companies, and so it'd be pretty speculative for me to kind of pick companies. But I'm very interested, as I said, in the intersection between software and data and networks and things like sustainable energy and biotechnology and bioengineering and urban engineering. So obviously there are pure biology kinds of scientific breakthroughs in genetics and things like that are interesting, and people have built companies around. And there are breakthroughs in material science and chemistry and other things that people have used to create new forms of energy. But one of the things I think that has great potential is leveraging data and information and connecting it to sensors that are either in the body or around the body, or in buildings and places to deal with things like biology and energy, and potentially bring efficiency or other kinds of value to those problems. So it's always the multidisciplinary approaches, I think, that are sometimes the most interesting anyway. So those would be two areas I think that would be good areas for local entrepreneurs to focus on, because there is enough well, there's a huge number of medical institutions in the city. There's certainly no shortage of biologists and science. I think still there are more life science patents being issued here in New York City than any other part of the world. It's just that we don't create companies here for some reason.
What are your thoughts on Stanford Cornell here? Do you think it might already change strategy?
What I have heard is that both the Stanford and the Cornell programs are largely going to be master's programs, not undergraduate programs. So I think if there's any impact, it's going to be in the graduate schools, not the undergraduate schools. And I think also it will be in some ways a boon and in some ways a competition. Have more engineering and science in New York City. In some ways will make it more of a place that people will think of to come pursue engineering and science degrees and engineering and science careers. So I think it's I've been on record that I think it's a shame that the city's going to throw a lot of resources, both real estate and capital, at institutions that aren't native to the city, because it seems a little like why can't we help the people who are already here? But if that's what happens, that's what happens, and I think that there will be some tangential benefits that will happen just from making New York City seen more as a place where engineering and science is important and valued.
Fred, I just want to thank you for the passion and the commitment that you have to this. It clearly comes across when you speak. I want to ask you kind of a two-parter. The first has to do with the herd mentality of venture investors. So when social graph gets hot or e-commerce subscription, there's kind of the bandwagon effect, right? There's the halo effect of one win. When one big investor with a track record goes into a specific sector, then that kind of heats up and more money flows there. So the question is, what would it take for you to make an investment in healthcare, IT, or energy infotech? And then the second is, if you're talking more about some of these infrastructure plays, right, whether it's energy infrastructure or biotech, these require patient capital. The upfront research and commercialization costs can be incredibly high versus something that's going to go into the iTunes store. And so, what needs to change in order for that to grow and for more long bets to be made? We need a dedicated fund for early stage investments coming from the university, and how do you envision different parts of the universities working together in order to commercialize some of the innovation that might be happening now at some of the labs?
Well, there's a lot of questions there. I should probably just write a new talk. Let me answer the last question first. I don't think that the answer to getting people at the university working together has to do with departments working together. It's people working together, right? I don't really care what the departments say or what the departments do, as long as the students and the faculty find ways to connect with each other, and that could be something like tonight, right? How many people here are from NYU but not from Poly? See? Right there. Okay, so that's good, right? So maybe they'll meet at the reception afterwards. That's the kind of thing I think that matters, more than some sort of formal, structural effort. I think the social interactions and just getting people to know each other and talk to each other is the most important. On the issue of sector diversity, I think there's a difference between energy and healthcare, because the healthcare industry is so highly regulated that almost any major innovation in healthcare, if it impacts clinical treatment of humans is going to have a long regulatory path that is going to require funding to get through. And the economics around that are difficult. Energy, although it's a regulated industry, innovations in and around energy are not necessarily regulated. So if someone comes up with a better thermostat or some smart device that you can stick in a building or a home that can manage the energy consumption in a way that saves money, that doesn't need regulatory approval, and that could come to market very quickly and could start producing income and profits fairly quickly. So I'm more optimistic about startups from a financing point of view. I'm more optimistic about startups in the intersection between information technology, software, and energy than I am at the intersection between information technology, software, and life sciences. And I'm not entirely sure what to do about the life sciences problem. It is not a problem that's unique to New York City. The amount of capital that's gone into venture funds and startups in the life sciences over the past 15 or 20 years has been on a gradual decline for a long time. The economics of investing in those businesses is just not particularly attractive. So that's something that I think maybe is a policy problem, that if we as a society believe that we need these large regulatory hurdles put up in front of new innovations in life sciences, then maybe we need to figure out a way to help fund these innovations along the way. But energy, I'm much more optimistic about. I think energy, some of the really big bets that you've seen made in Silicon Valley around biofuels and new forms of nuclear energy and even materials science around solar and some of the other technologies have struggled. But I think that again is a capital problem. When you're building companies that require hundreds of millions of dollars of capital, from raw startup to getting a product to market, that's always going to be tricky. But we have an investment in a company in London called Amy, which is one of the leading carbon footprinting services, probably the leading carbon footprinting service. And so people who are building software, whether it's enterprise software or other kinds of software, and that want to measure or report on the carbon consumption of certain kinds of activities, will often use the Amy platform to do that. So we've already made one investment in that area, and I think we would make more investments in that area. We don't see, frankly, a lot of entrepreneurs knocking on our door with those kinds of ideas. And if we saw more entrepreneurs knocking on our doors with those kinds of ideas, I think we would probably fund more of those kinds of ideas.
As a venture capitalist, I'm sure you do a number of business plans. What are your top 5 things that you look for that would propel you to invest fully in a startup?
So the makeup of the founding team is really important to us. We want people on the team who can make the product. We don't want a team coming in and saying, we're going to hire somebody to make this product, or we're going to go recruit somebody to make this product. So if it's software, we want software engineers on the team. If it's making something that's physical, we want people who know how to make that kind of a thing. We want one of the founders to be a talented product visionary, someone who can truly scope out what the product needs to be, spec it out, make sure it's built in the way that they imagined it, and actually knows how to bring a product to market that the market actually wants. That person is often the CEO. And we don't want much other extraneous matter. You know, we don't want a bunch of people hanging around who are going to have to get paid that aren't really, you know, involved in making something.
And in terms of the finances, what are your projection periods? Or what is your most desirable projection?
You know, we don't really look at numbers. So we want to know how much it's going to cost to keep the team paid, and we want to know how long it's going to take to get the product to market, and probably 3 to 6 months of having the product in the market, and whatever that is how much money we'll invest. And you know, then we'll see how it goes. The early stage business, the way we think about it, is it's a bet on people, and it's a bet on the idea. And so the way we think about the business is that we will make a diversified number of investments, 20 to 25 typically, for every fund that we raise. And we raise a new fund every 4 years. And the initial investment that we make is sufficient to have the product in the market, getting material feedback from the market about whether this product has a chance of being successful or not. And we'll make 20 to 25 of those investments, and typically a third of those 20 to 25 investments will turn out to have been bad, that the people couldn't do it, or the thing that they built wasn't any good, and therefore it was a failed investment. The other 2/3 will show enough promise that we'll put additional capital into them. And then that's usually to further build out the market and the adoption of the product. But again, usually for another 12 to 18 months. And then over the second 12 to 18 months, that remaining group will start to stratify between people who are kind of getting there, but not so easily, and people who are really doing a great job. And then we will tend to invest a lot more money behind the people who are doing a really great job, and probably not that much more money behind the people who are really struggling. And so we don't really focus on the projections, right? Because who really knows when you're writing a business plan? We just focus on the idea and the people, and we let the projections kind of reveal themselves to us over time as we make these incremental bets. And I think people who get too analytical about things early on in the investment process aren't really the kind of partners you want. You want people who are as excited about the idea as you are, and who you want to work with as much as they want to work with you. So where they like your team and you like their team, and those are kind of the two things that matter at the very beginning.
What are some of the common denominators you've found among many of the successful entrepreneurs that you've seen?
So the things I was talking about before are really critical. The ability to imagine a product and to bring it to life. So that's a design and creative conceptual ability, and then the ability to communicate to a team of people who are actually going to help make it, and work with them to actually bring the product to market. So that's critical. But in addition to that, I'd say there's two other characteristics that we look for. One is what you could call leadership. It's charisma, it's optimism, it's just this ability to get people to buy into your dream and make it their dream. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is tenacity. The ability to have really bad stretches, a month, 2, 3, 4 stretches, 3, 4 month stretches, where everything's going against you, and to just basically be able to roll with it and be unfazed and just power through. Because that comes back to the leadership quality. There's no way that you're going to get everybody else to power through it if you're not, showing this kind of strong tenacity. So those would be the three things I think that are the most important. At least in the early stages, in the critical formation stages. Once a company gets up and running and the product's in the market, you can start to hire people who can do things that you can't do. If you're no good with numbers, you can hire somebody who's good with numbers. If you're no good with marketing, you can hire somebody who's good at marketing. But those characteristics, I don't think you can be successful if you don't possess them yourself.
So, I have two questions. So how it's great to produce engineers, but how do you retain them?
How do you keep them here in New York?
Yes.
You want to ask the second question too, or do you want me to wait?
And the second is a challenge. So can you institute an X prize?
I'm sorry,
Can you institute an X prize?
an X Prize?
Yes.
I might. I don't know. What is that? I mean, what does that entail?
Well, today I was thinking about the need that, well, if you go to the radiology department at NYU, and you want to have an MRI or a CAT scan, you get into those machines and it's really scary because of the size they have.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I went for my first MRI last Friday.
Okay, so you can, these are huge magnets. So I think thinking about, okay, let's bring the size of those machines down. So instead of having a huge room for one machine, so you can have several in a smaller piece, in a smaller room, in a smaller place, make the whole process better for patients, for the whole community. So I think there is a huge need for a smaller diagnostic machines.
Right.
So
Do you know if there are people building or working on building those kinds of machines?
I don't know, but I'm sure there are.
Right.
But why can then when you design one of these?
Well, so I think that's a great idea. And, I guess the first thing I would try to find out is there anybody at the medical school
They are.
who are interested in this problem, and is there a way to help them connect to people here at Poly who might help them on the engineering side or the science side to do that? So that's a great idea. If there's an X Prize that makes that happen, then I don't know what I mean. Is an X Prize a dollar prize? Someone puts a prize and says if you can solve this problem, you win the money.
Well, yeah, one very famous X Prize was about the design for this spaceship.
Right.
But it was so you have to use the same machine to refuel and go again into space in a short time. So.
Right. Well, I think that's a great idea. I'd certainly be open to doing something like that. So maybe Jerry can come after me with some ideas. But how you retain engineers is by creating interesting projects and interesting companies for them to work for, and to make sure that they can have a quality of life here in New York that is a sustainable quality of life. And so that means interesting companies working on interesting problems where they can make a good living. And we have that in some sectors, and we don't have that in other sectors. That's a big part of what I was talking about with sector diversity. If you're a software engineer, graduated from Poly or graduated from MIT or graduated from Caltech or anywhere, you can, and you're good, you can get a great job here in New York, working for fun, interesting companies who are doing challenging work, where you're going to be motivated and where you're going to be valued. If you're a chemical engineer or You know, a bioengineer, maybe not. You know, and so that's why we need this sector diversity. We have to retain all the engineering talent, not just the, you know, software engineers. So it's jobs and interesting projects and interesting work.
I'm also very enthralled with data, making changes to actual things, and specifically energy is just my personal sector. But I'm also aware of the strides the city has made with open data. And as it relates to energy, you know, the utility companies own all of the infrastructure as well as the data. Do you think a similar sort of open data movement is needed for each of these sectors?
Well, that's a really interesting idea. Now, the utility companies are regulated entities. They're regulated by the states and maybe also by the federal government. I don't really know. But if the regulators changed the rules and said, look, you want a rate increase, then you got to open up your data. You have to start making your data about energy consumption obviously privatized, right? I mean, you know, anonymized anyway. I mean, you don't want, I'm not necessarily sure I want my energy consumption data public. Not that I would really care that much, but I mean, just thinking about it, you know, I'm not sure citizens would want that. But if that was the deal, you get next rate increase, you're going to start opening up your data so that entrepreneurs can start taking that data and building services and companies and devices that lead to more energy efficient behavior and activity. That's probably smart regulation, right? So I don't know anything about this, but it seems to me that that's something that we should be agitating for, something that we should be demanding as citizens who have to pay our electric bills, and these are regulated entities. They decide how much we're going to pay per kilowatt or whatever. And if we're the ones who are paying for it, we should use our voices and demand that this data gets opened up so we can use it.
Have you seen a similar occurrence in another industry? That obviously, I think that would piss off the utility companies.
I've seen it in the medical industry, and I think there's a bunch of stuff in the monstrous healthcare legislation that was passed last year around more data, outcomes data, cost data, things like that you know, has to become more available. There's medical records requirements now that are part of that legislation, where patients, there's a requirement to make their patients' medical data, records data available to the patients and things like that. So yeah, I think this is a trend. Like I think people understand, more and more people every day understand that allowing the big companies who dominate these industries to control the data lets them control the industries, and that we need to open up the data to create more innovation and, frankly, to lessen their control over everything.
Can I just throw a comment on top of that? I think it's actually already changing, maybe more quickly than we realize. For example, I have an energy management service company. One of the things we work on is real-time energy monitoring in buildings, and you can go to Con Ed and say, I want the data, and you can upgrade your meter to be pulse output. It costs a few $100, and it's not like a big deal. And they're quite happy to partner with you on that. So they're not trying to keep the data proprietary. The challenge comes in trying to get historical data. And there, I bet they have just a harder time getting at it as you. So,
You think the problem is that they just can't get it, or do you think that they just don't really want you to have it?
I know, at least on a go-forward basis, it's not an issue anymore. In fact, they're almost encouraging it. I think they want to see these kinds of projects to go. And it's a new Con Ed now that's talking about, I mean, they're facing a load pocket right here in Tech, which is pretty astonishing. I think that they're motivated to find ways to avoid these 9-figure spends that they're looking at in places around the city. So, but the historical data, the time series data issue, is to do with, I think they have antiquated legacy systems there. I mean, I don't want to pick on them, and they're not here, but.
Jerry, did CUSP get announced?
Yes.
When was CUSP announced?
So we'll file it tomorrow. It is announced.
Is it in the public domain?
Yes.
And are the partners in CUSP in the public domain?
Yes.
And is Con Ed one of them?
Yes.
Okay, so I just need to know what I can say and what I can't say. So NYU and Poly are launching a new institute. Is it an institute? Is that the right? Center for Urban Sciences Progress, which will hopefully be here in downtown Brooklyn, which will be an initiative of NYU and Poly plus Carnegie Mellon, University of Toronto, Warwick University in the UK, and
CUNY and IT Bombay.
CUNY in IT Bombay, and they have people like the MTA and Con Ed signed on to collaborate with faculty, researchers, and students and entrepreneurs who want to build new devices, new services, new businesses, new technologies. And I didn't name all. I mean, IBM's involved. There's Smarter Cities Initiative and a whole bunch of other people involved. But this is a really important thing for New York. I mean, we are one of the most dense urban environments in the world. We have some of the most sophisticated systems for transit and energy and some of the other important technologies. And we should be a leading center of innovation. And energy is a big piece of this. And data is a big piece of it. Big data and data analysis and using data to do things more efficiently and better. So it's a very exciting initiative. And it's available on the web now.
I think, they're asking us to quarantine the project while they do the official reviews at the City Hall.
Oh, I see.
So it'll probably be 2 months before the full document will be out, but there'll be a summary.
So what got announced today?
The filing of the document
Oh.
and the overall.
I got it. All right.
Size.
Anyway. So you heard it here first.
Yeah.
Breaking news. Other questions?
I see a lot of co-working spaces kind of cropping up all over the city.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
See a lot of co-working spaces for like startup incubators popping up around the city, but the difference between the software startups and the biotech energy is that a lot of times you need to make things
Right.
and prototype things, and there doesn't really seem to be a space that fosters that. You mentioned ITP before, kind of like a small shop environment where you can build things and make things, breaking, solder, etc. Do you know of any plans to kind of?
Well, yeah, so there's something called Tech Shop coming in to Metrotech.
Do you know when that's?
Jerry, do you know when Tech Shop's coming in?
Let's say within 2 to 4 months.
So Tech Shop started in San Francisco, and Tech Shop isn't everything you want, probably, but it's a place that you can get your hands on heavy equipment, lathes, and other kinds of things that you could at least use to create prototypes and do that kind of work. There's also a lot going on in 3D printing, which is another area that's quite promising. Does Poly have any 3D printers?
Yes.
Where?
Yeah.
Oh, where?
Yeah, where?
I know one of the clubs, Polygons, they have like a close partnership with MakerBot.
Right.
Some of the students intern there.
Right.
There's like 4 or 5 MakerBots in there, but I believe the Mechie department has a pretty like, nice size 3D printer.
Again, a 3D printer is not gonna solve your manufacturing problem, at least not today, but could help a lot with prototyping and getting something built. But it's true. These co-working facilities, whether it's the Varick Street facility or there's a new incubator going into Dumbo, which is focused on digital media. Those probably aren't the right kinds of places. And I think you raise a really good point about sector diversity in general. The kinds of space that you need to make software, I mean, you can make software in your kitchen if you wanted to. But if you want to make something that has to do with materials, energy, bio, then you're talking things that are more like labs and finding something that's somewhere between a co-working space and an incubator and a lab. We don't have enough of that in New York, and so initiatives like that are important. And I'd love to hear people's ideas about that, and I suspect that you'd find a lot of sympathetic people to those kinds of ideas.
There's also Gen Space in Brooklyn too, which is a bio-community lab as well.
Bio what lab?
It's a community lab, but it's bio-based. It's like a laboratory.
What's it called?
Gen Space.
GEN space.
Yeah.
Someone should build a wiki with all of these on it, and let people know about where they can go get their hands dirty.
Maybe, or it's a lot of entrepreneurs and startup type incubators.
The Navy Yard.
Brooklyn Navy Yard, yeah, for production, shop type production. There's a couple of groups. There's the main Brooklyn Navy Yard organization, as well as a couple of smaller incubators within the Navy Yard and stuff like that. Depends on what you're trying to do. I know of one.
That's great. Information, pass it back and forth. That's what we need more of in this town. It's great.
With companies like Kickstarter now in place, the whole concept of getting funding for ideas and for projects is changing. Do you see the projects that are usually on there are more one-off small things or softwares or a delivery of some sort of fashion item? Do you see that playing a part in the sectors that you just mentioned?
I would like to see Kickstarter have more of an impact in things like bioengineering and energy, sustainable energy projects. For those who don't know, I'm an investor in Kickstarter, so I'm obviously a big fan of what they're doing. Today the numbers aren't that big. The average Kickstarter project raises like $10,000, maybe even less, maybe $7,000 or $8,000. There's, I think, maybe 4 or 5 projects that have raised more than $500,000. So, Kickstarter is not a alternative to seed financing and early stage venture capital yet, but I think it could be. And I'm certainly hoping that Kickstarter can continue to grow its base of projects and also its base of backers. And some of the most interesting things about Kickstarter are the products category. So people are probably familiar with the TikTok watch story, where a designer designed a watch band that an iPod Nano would snap into, and tried to raise, I think it's either $15,000 or $25,000 for tooling costs to make a short run of these watches so that he could sell them. And he gave a watch as the reward for contributing $25. And he said, I'm going to sell this watch band, not watch. I'm going to sell this watch band after I make it for $35 or $40 or whatever. And he raised almost $1 million, literally got enough orders for watches that he almost raised $1 million. And so obviously he could make all the watch bands he needed to make. And those watch bands are now sold in the Apple stores. So it's just a story, and I like to think of it as a futures market for products. So if you have an idea for a product, and it's a compelling enough idea, and you are credible enough as the designer that people would think you could make it, you can take your design, you put it up on Kickstarter, and say, when I make it, I'm going to send you one. And this notion that instead of having to raise seed capital or equity capital, but you can just sell futures on the product to get the money in advance to go make the product, is a pretty transformational idea. And I do hope that it will scale into much larger numbers, and so much bigger things. Watch bands are cool, but it'd be even cooler if you could build, I don't know, an air conditioning unit or something.
I guess a part of the concept of getting people to invest in things like that is the return that you get in place of it. In this case, it was an actual product.
Right. So what I would want is I'd want 20% of your company, right? And the idea is, instead of selling me 20% of your company, just sell, the promise of a watch band to 500 or 1,000 people, and you own 100% of your company. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
concepts like
one
that-
could say it's threatening to the venture capital business, but so what? You know, I mean, if it means that more great things get made and the world becomes a better place, then, you know, that's okay with me.